Danny Dorling. The Next Crisis. What we think about the future. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by news headlines shouting about global crises, looming disasters, and threats to our everyday lives? You're not alone. Millions of people around the world grapple with anxieties about rising living costs, unstable job markets, personal safety, and complex environmental issues. But how often do these fears truly match reality? Surprisingly, our worries don't always line up with actual risks or expert predictions. Instead, they're shaped by media narratives, political agendas, and our own shifting perceptions. Understanding what genuinely concerns people across the globe and why can help you make sense of today's complicated, anxiety-driven world. Knowing the difference between real threats and exaggerated fears can empower you to respond constructively and calmly rather than reactively. In this blink, you'll learn about the fears dominating the world's collective consciousness, from anxieties about the cost of living and employment security to climate skepticism and biodiversity loss. First, let's explore why our culture today feels uniquely obsessed with the concept of crisis itself. Our obsession with crisis shapes our worldview. People today talk about crises more than ever, yet the actual frequency of disasters or catastrophic events hasn't increased. So why do we feel continually overwhelmed? Part of the answer lies in our improved living standards. Ironically, when we're less directly threatened by daily survival, we have more time to worry about potential future problems. But this doesn't fully explain the rise in anxiety. Since around the 1960s, the word crisis has steadily appeared more often in books and media. What once referred to rare and urgent turning points is now used to describe everything from politics and housing to health and the environment. This broadening of the term doesn't reflect more emergencies, but a shift in how we frame challenges. Much of this is reinforced by a rapidly growing and competitive media environment where dramatic language grabs attention and fuels a constant sense of alarm. Surveys show what really occupies people's minds, and the results often differ from expert forecasts. For example, in 2022, specialists at the World Economic Forum predicted the biggest threats would include energy crises, food shortages, and cyber attacks. Yet many people were more immediately worried about the rising cost of living, inequality, and personal safety. This gap highlights a crucial disconnect. Experts often focus on issues they see as threatening the global order or markets, while everyday citizens are concerned with immediate problems that impact their daily lives and futures. Interestingly, concerns are not static. Take the COVID-19 pandemic, which dominated global worries in early 2020 but sharply declined as vaccines arrived. This shift demonstrates how quickly public anxiety can change. It also underscores the importance of paying close attention to ordinary people's perspectives rather than letting elite anxieties dictate what counts as a crisis. Understanding this helps us navigate our collective fears better, moving us beyond generalized anxiety toward clearer, shared solutions. And as you'll soon see, this approach matters deeply in confronting what actually concerns most of us: the ever-rising costs of everyday life. Rising living costs dominate global concerns. When people around the globe reflect on their biggest anxieties, one worry consistently tops the list: the relentless climb in living costs. It's a concern rooted in daily reality, where inflation, poverty, and widening inequality shape how secure people feel and what kind of future they can imagine. Take inflation, for example. When wages don't keep up with rising prices, families feel squeezed at the grocery store, struggle to pay energy bills, and question their financial stability. Recent surveys confirm this isn't a niche problem, but a dominant concern worldwide. From Europe to Latin America, inflation shapes daily decisions and long-term planning, fueling widespread anxiety about the future. Yet poverty and inequality also play critical roles. Despite optimistic charts claiming global poverty has dramatically fallen since the 1960s, A closer look reveals a different picture. These reductions largely stemmed from a significant drop in birth rates among the poorest families rather than meaningful improvements in income distribution or real economic fairness. For many, the reality remains grim. Substantial wealth continues to accumulate at the very top, often at the expense of middle and low-income groups. In fact, fears about inequality have surged precisely because expectations for fair economic opportunities aren't matching up with lived realities. Interestingly, our worries about rising living costs aren't fixed. They evolve with circumstances. For example, COVID-19 briefly dominated global anxieties, only to be swiftly overtaken by financial pressures as pandemic measures eased. This dynamic underscores how closely personal fears are tied to immediate economic realities, more so than to abstract global threats or political turmoil. Understanding how deeply and universally concerns about living costs resonate sets the stage for examining another pressing anxiety: employment, and whether there will be enough stable work for everyone in the future. You'll learn more about that in the next section. Employment and immigration shape our shared future. Around the world, after worrying about costs and inequality, people next fret over jobs, specifically whether there will be enough good jobs for themselves and their families in the years ahead. At the heart of these anxieties are two linked issues: unemployment and immigration. Unemployment alarms people because it threatens their sense of security and dignity. While joblessness is a global concern, the fear is especially strong in places where unemployment has historically led to severe hardship. Take Britain, for example. Although current unemployment figures are relatively low, memories of mass unemployment in the 1980s and 1990s linger, creating deep-seated fears. Even with plenty of jobs available today, many are low-paid, insecure positions that leave workers financially vulnerable. This insecurity fuels ongoing anxiety and shapes how people perceive newcomers to their communities. That's where immigration enters the picture. In wealthy countries, rising inequality often creates demand for inexpensive labor, drawing migrants seeking better opportunities. Yet, ironically, these new arrivals frequently become scapegoats blamed for economic hardship and job scarcity. Despite ample evidence showing immigration doesn't reduce overall job availability, this fear persists, driven by political rhetoric that exploits economic anxieties. Historical examples abound. Restrictive immigration measures during economic downturns like the Great Depression show how quickly fear about jobs and immigrants can intertwine. Today's anxieties about work aren't just about numbers. They're about how we collectively manage resources and responsibilities. For instance, the allocation of public sector jobs significantly impacts societal stability. Fewer such roles often mean weaker public services, diminished community support, and increased feelings of insecurity. These intertwined anxieties about employment security and immigration are central to how we shape our shared future. They directly influence how welcoming or defensive we become as communities. And this leads naturally into considering the profound anxieties surrounding conflict, safety, and having a stable home. War, violence, and the struggle for safety. When people worry about war and violence, they aren't simply afraid of distant conflicts shown on news broadcasts. Their anxieties reflect deeper fears about personal security and stability at home. While major international conflicts like Russia's invasion of Ukraine or violence in Gaza grab headlines, surveys show that people's worries are often much closer to home. Even in relatively safe places, anxieties about potential violence can overshadow more everyday threats such as failing healthcare, poor nutrition, and environmental dangers like pollution. Issues that actually pose far greater risks but seem less frightening because they're familiar and slow-moving. Interestingly, these concerns often get distorted by politics. Leaders frequently exploit anxieties about war or terrorism to distract citizens from addressing more local, solvable problems like housing shortages and social inequality. For example, while housing crises in countries like the Netherlands or the UK are largely driven by decades of government policies limiting home availability, politicians sometimes wrongly blame immigrants or refugees to divert public frustration. This misdirection feeds a cycle of fear and suspicion, deepening social divides rather than addressing real underlying issues. Crime also blends into this picture of insecurity. High levels of street violence or gang activity in places like Brazil or South Africa, and increasingly in parts of Europe, make people wary about their immediate surroundings, further eroding community trust. In these contexts, fears of violence become linked to broader anxieties about governance, fairness, and societal cohesion. Ultimately, concerns about war and personal safety reveal profound questions about who gets to feel secure, whose fears are prioritized, and how effectively societies address the root causes of instability. Recognizing this complexity is essential to understanding why anxieties around war and home are so prevalent. And it sets the stage for exploring how worries about health, aging, and the societal safety nets designed to support us throughout life shape global fears. Anxieties around health, aging, and social support. Around the world, people share profound worries about how societies care for us from birth until old age. These concerns aren't limited to physical health alone, they're deeply connected to social support systems like education, taxation, and healthcare. While anxiety about personal health is widespread, what varies most is how these issues manifest, depending on each country's resources and priorities. Take happiness, for example, something that's easy to overlook as a luxury. Yet surveys show nearly half the global population hasn't felt genuinely happy for years, highlighting how social conditions directly impact our emotional well-being. Scandinavian countries like Finland, Denmark, and Iceland consistently top global happiness rankings, thanks largely to strong social safety nets, reliable healthcare, and educational systems designed to reduce anxiety and uncertainty. In stark contrast, countries struggling with unstable governance or economic turmoil, such as Afghanistan or Lebanon, report dramatically lower happiness scores. Meanwhile, developed nations like the US and the UK are facing their own health crises. Life expectancy in these countries is dropping for certain groups, particularly lower-income populations, illustrating stark inequalities in healthcare and living conditions. In America, your chance of living a long, healthy life increasingly depends on where you live and your income level, raising alarm bells about fairness and social responsibility. The UK faces similar challenges, with overwhelmed healthcare systems and significant public frustration over declining standards. These anxieties extend beyond individual health, reflecting deeper fears about how effectively societies allocate resources and provide for all citizens throughout life. At its core, people's worries from cradle to grave speak to fundamental questions about fairness, equity, and the effectiveness of social institutions. Recognizing these widespread concerns naturally points us toward another global anxiety: our collective ability to confront and manage the escalating climate crisis. Climate anxiety meets real-world skepticism. Climate change regularly grabs headlines, yet it's not the world's top concern. In fact, surveys show it ranks fifth among global anxieties. One reason is growing skepticism about whether urgent climate action is genuinely affordable or even achievable. Although climate change is real and its impacts are serious, like increased natural disasters and rising sea levels, people worldwide have begun expressing doubt about the sincerity of political commitments. Politicians promising action on climate are often seen as serving their own interests, which only reinforces public cynicism. Despite multiple record-breaking heatwaves and clear evidence from climate scientists, recent polls reveal a puzzling shift. Global willingness to prioritize climate action is declining. Young people, surprisingly, show growing disengagement, especially young men, who increasingly doubt whether moving away from fossil fuels is economically viable. Even respected climate bodies like the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have adjusted their messaging, steering away from catastrophic language to maintain credibility and rebuild consensus. This widespread skepticism is understandable. While dramatic warnings dominate the media, real-life experiences haven't always matched these dire predictions. For example, although climate-related disasters are increasing, the direct effects on most people's daily lives, especially in wealthier countries, often feel distant or manageable. In fact, many people in developed countries see immediate economic issues, crime, or personal safety as more pressing concerns. Additionally, significant minorities in countries like the US still doubt climate change altogether, complicating global consensus and collective action. Addressing climate anxiety effectively requires acknowledging these complex human reactions, recognizing people's skepticism, and understanding why climate issues currently take a back seat to immediate economic or social concerns is essential. This perspective lays the foundation for exploring one final anxiety: the widespread fears surrounding biodiversity and ecological stability. Biodiversity loss reflects our priorities and anxieties. Biodiversity loss rarely tops the list of global concerns. In fact, surveys consistently show that worries about the environment rank far below immediate issues like inflation, unemployment, and healthcare. Yet, paradoxically, biodiversity is seen by many scientists and environmentalists as perhaps the most profound crisis humanity faces. Why the gap between public concern and expert warnings? One explanation lies in visibility. Biodiversity decline is slow and subtle, often invisible in day-to-day life. People rarely notice when species vanish, ecosystems degrade, or forests shrink incrementally. But experts see this process clearly. Earth's diversity of life is shrinking at a troubling rate, mainly due to human encroachment, pollution, and industrial-scale agriculture and fishing. Interestingly, despite grim warnings, biodiversity loss is actually slowing down somewhat, as conservation efforts and better land management practices gain traction globally. However, some environmentalists push dramatic, even radical solutions, such as drastic reductions in human population or compulsory dietary shifts to restore balance. These proposals provoke backlash, skepticism, and sometimes ridicule, highlighting deep societal divisions over how to approach this complex problem. There's also a risk of overstating immediate dangers. While biodiversity loss poses real threats, like disrupted food systems and weakened resilience to climate shocks, dramatic predictions of impending catastrophe often fail to materialize exactly as projected. As a result, public urgency wanes, reducing the incentive for political action and creating a problematic cycle of skepticism. Nevertheless, maintaining biodiversity remains essential. It provides vital ecological services, from pollination and soil preservation to climate regulation. Protecting it requires both technological solutions and social innovations, from lab-grown proteins to better agricultural methods. Ultimately, our attitudes toward biodiversity reflect broader anxieties about humanity's role on Earth. Recognizing these subtle but serious environmental challenges helps us better understand the global tapestry of fears and priorities. It underscores the interconnected nature of our concerns, showing how environmental anxiety blends into worries about economics, fairness, and our collective future. The main takeaway of this Blink to the Next Crisis by Danny Dorling is that public anxiety offers a powerful window into what people value, fear, and expect from society, and those concerns often differ sharply from what political leaders or expert institutions prioritize. Across topics as varied as economic pressure, employment, safety, healthcare, climate change, and the environment, what consistently emerges is a portrait of a world deeply preoccupied with fairness, stability, and trust. By paying closer attention to what people actually say they're worried about, we gain a clearer understanding of what needs fixing and why. These worries are real, but they're also signals, pointing toward opportunities to create more responsive systems and fairer societies. And that's something we can all work toward. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.